thanks everybody for coming out. It's the last session of the day, and usually, they say we're keeping in the way of beer, but if you're drinking this early, Morgan?
I'm Morgan. Exactly. My name is Morgan. Both of us work at DoSomething.org. My title is a senior software engineer. I previously was just DevOps at DoSomething, but now I'm also writing Drupal code. So I'm back and forth all the time. As a note, DoSomething.org is in New York City, but I just moved here from Brooklyn about a month and a half ago. So I'm looking to make friends, especially in the Drupal community. So come say hi later and let me know your name. So.
My name is Sina. I also work for DoSomething.org. Just quick description: DoSomething.org is the largest, basically, org for young people and social good in the U.S. It's like 4.3 or 4 million members now, as of a couple of days ago. So basically, our target demographic is 13 to 25-year-olds, and campaigns that don't involve a car, that don't require a car, money, or one other.
An adult.
And an adult supervision. So it's things like collecting genes for homeless teens. So we have something called Teens for Genes. So a lot of good stuff. Check out the website. There's all sorts of fun campaigns. I'm basically infrastructure architect and come much more of an ops. I've been supporting Drupal infrastructure since basically Drupal 6 beta, a lot more on the ops side. So I don't do as much Drupal coding, but I'm doing a lot of the infrastructure and integration parts. So. Let's start
out. Sure. So we can.
Yeah.
First up. So we've got a few sections that we're going to go through. First, we're going to talk about the old world. So in the old world is our previous cloud that we were in. And then we're going to talk about the path to new world, which is migration. And then we're going to talk about some of the tools that we use to get from A to B, and the tools that we use now in production. And then we're going to talk about the new DoSomething.org, and then what's the last one?
A little bit of future, like future stuff, things that we're planning, things that are ongoing, because we completed the migration like 3 months ago.
Yep,
something like that.
Oh, something like that.
So first, little plug. I know this like in every tech conference. Part 0, bad news. We're not hiring, so sorry. And the obligatory sad cat. We've had a lot of growth. Part 0.5, the good news, we love collaboration open source, and the happy corgi with a cupcake, a gloratory puppy picture. Almost all of our repos are open source. Drupal code, Ansible, which is our automation framework. Almost all of our config stuff outside of like private server keys, password stuff, which we keep in private repos. Almost everything is open source, and that includes stuff beyond Drupal. So we have like our own user API code that's written in Laravel as a framework and all the other stuff. So check it out. We have, I think it's like, 35 or something open source repos at this point?
I think public it's more like 90 or something.
Okay,
actually.
There you go.
Yeah, there's a lot.
You use just Laravel and Drupal?
Yeah, so we have it for different projects. We have a very wide engineering thing. Yeah. And another quite small plug, we have a sister organization called Crisis Text Line, and they are hiring, and they're thirsty for Drupal talent. The CTO slacked me privately and in big capital letters. He's like, please ask for Drupal engineers. They do a lot of basically texting in for crisis lines, so anybody who needs help, instead of like calling into a hotline, they text. It's private, it's anonymized, they're growing. They're based out of New York, but they do have remote engineers, so whether you want to move to New York, which is a great city, I still live there, or you want to work remotely, this is their small plug for our sister org. And now to get into the good stuff.
Yeah, so before we were working with a private cloud and public cloud provider, which shall remain nameless for now until it slips out later probably. But just want to give you a little bit of detail about the way our environment looked before. So what we were doing was we were running an OpenStack cloud, which is a private cloud, and you run it on your own hardware. So that hardware can be in a closet in your office, or it can be located somewhere else, and you can have somebody else manage it. So for us, it was a fully managed system, in the sense that they set up and ran the public cloud, but we had access to create VMs via the interface. And the way that was set up is we had 2 firewall servers because we had to connect the public cloud that we had our old environment on to our new private cloud. So we had a couple of firewall servers to manage that. And then we had 4 nodes within the private cloud. So whenever you want to expand the size of a private cloud, you have to actually add another physical server. So we had 4 nodes in there. And we ended up with about 50 virtual servers. Before Sina was talking about Laravel, we're running Node.js and Laravel and Drupal and just a whole bunch of different things. So we had a bunch of different servers for that. So one of the things that we were also running was Grizzly. So our OpenStack was the Grizzly version, and now I think they're on Juno. They actually might be even further.
They're on Kilo now.
The Kilo. Yeah. Okay, so at the time we were 2 versions behind because Icehouse had just come out, and in order to move from the old version into the new one, because the old one had so many bugs, like just the user interface was like really buggy. You had to click like 6 times to get something to work. I was like, come on, you can't even get anything done. But to do that required a manual upgrade, and what that meant was going on and like moving files physically, or like using Ansible or something like that to set up new servers anyway. So it required a lot of work. And also upgrading from the old version to the new version was going to increase our cost by at least 50%, because the new version of Icehouse with this particular provider required a whole bunch more hardware. So I think we needed like an additional 7 hardware servers in order to run the thing, and we just don't have that much. The reason that they did that was because this product that they were using was shooting for large companies, like huge enterprises, and we're running 4 nodes, and the point is that this could be expanded to 200 nodes. We didn't need any more than 4 nodes. We already had too much capacity with that.
You were trying to reduce the nodes as it was.
Exactly, right. So paying additional 50% didn't really make any sense for us. Excuse me. So another thing, in the private cloud, it was just me. So I was the DevOps, and anytime anybody needed a server or anything like that, I did it, which was kind of problematic because I didn't really know what I was doing a lot, because I was a developer. But I had set up servers and that sort of thing. But that's not being a sysadmin, or But Sina helped me a lot with a bunch of things. I'd send him a message at night or something and be like, please help me. I can't, please. So, because I was the only one, there was only one set of eyes on our infrastructure for the most part, unless I ran into trouble with something. But it also meant that I was sort of isolated, in the sense that whenever the dev team needed something, they just sort of shovel it off and say, well, we need a server, which was nice because that means that I could just decide the way that it would be set up, but it's not always the best way to go. So now we can talk a little bit about migrating to AWS.
Yeah, so Morgan went through actually a lot of exploration about why to migrate to AWS. One of the things, I'd done basically 2 environments, AWS migrations of the 2 jobs I had before this, and actually kind of almost started interning at nights, and I would stop by the office twice a week to help Morgan with stuff when it was really getting into the thick of it. So the exploratory stuff was, number 1 was cost, and you did most of the analytics on that, but it was something like 50% savings over the private cloud, and we could pretty much walk away at any time. Open the provider we had, I think, was a 2-year contract, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So the huge benefit for us is, we're not a company that operates with we're not for profit. So, we have a very fixed amount of income per month. If that ever changes and it goes down and we need to shut things down or move over, it gave us a lot of flexibility, which is a huge win. AWS, I know it's kind of, it's almost like drinking the Kool-Aid. Almost everybody has moved something to AWS, even if it's not their whole entire infrastructure. But that was a big thing is, as a smaller org, actually we have a large, like almost a fourth of our org is an engineering team. For a not-for-profit, we have like 16 engineers. But we also have a lot of products. So if we ever needed to do third-party support, or somebody had spun up a product, instead of spinning 20, 30, 40 engineer hours, which had a premium to deliver our products, we had to spend it on server provisioning and figuring out this product. Like a lot of other orgs our size would literally have a 6 or 7 person like DevOps or Ops team who could figure out that stuff and not have to deal with the day-to-day code pushes and everything else. We didn't have that. A lot of things are already ready done. Like the AWS Marketplace is amazing. You're like, oh, I want this firewall or I want this piece of software. Somebody spun it up. The company blesses it and they'll give you support for it, and it costs a little bit more, which is also amazing. You want to talk about the scalability and flexibility a bit?
Yeah, so when I was mentioning earlier that in our private cloud we had 4 nodes, we originally started with 3 and then we needed more VMs, so we had to add an additional node. But that cost, I think that cost us like $1,500 extra a month. And you know, for a small org, again, like we don't really need to be spending all that money, especially when we're only using like 10 or 15% of that node. So the nice thing about AWS is you can spin up an instance, spin it down whenever you want. You can even spin up nodes on demand to run large scale issues that you have, or like run through large scale problems that you have. So it was really nice from that point of view too. And then we'd also been running a little bit of things on AWS we have another organization that works with like under our umbrella called TMI, and they're an agency. So some of their clients needed things, so we could spin up things in AWS for them and keep the billing separate. So that's one of the things.
Cost-controlled experimentation. We'll go into this a little bit at the end about one of our big things that we're working on and launching in 2 weeks, hopefully, or at least soft launching, is going global. So we had an instance where we wanted to test running something, and anybody who follows like the Netflix tech crowd, Adrian Cockcroft, who's our former CTO who got all their stuff into AWS, he talked about, you know, if you want to run an experiment in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, well, if you're a private cloud, you have to see whether your provider has a server down there, has a data warehouse, has a presence, and then you have to spend a minimum for them to actually put a server there because they don't have guaranteed capacity. Well, when you have a lot of other people in the area that have that capacity, we literally spun up like a T2 micro server for about 3 days just to see what it was like running out of there, traffic latency, all this testing, and I think it cost us $10. And then we just shut it down because we decided that's not where we wanted to host stuff. So cost-controlled experimentation, and this goes to stuff, I'm not sure how heavy uses everybody's in the room is for Drupal, but if you're running a large-scale, let's say, e-commerce site, and you need to run analytics in the background or anything like that, even if you're just using it as a bunch of servers, we're not even talking about like using the fancy AWS services like machine learning or Redshift, which is their data warehousing, or anything like that. You provision all your servers, and you're like, okay, I need to find this thing once a month. You spin up 100 servers, you run your jobs, you shut them down, and you literally pay for your day's usage. So that was a really cool thing for us. And then, yeah, battle tested. It's almost any, I don't want to say successful because that's a little bit more, but any startup-y, small to medium-sized enterprise in the last 5 years, almost any time they give a tech presentation, whether it's super technical or just basic, AWS has some part of their infrastructure, like we need infinite storage, so we just throw the objects on S3 and it's super cheap and we can access it at any time. It almost never goes down. We want to run backups to it. We have our own data center, but we need an offsite replication for failover. So how do we do that? And AWS has not been without its outages. There's been some very public outages like Christmas 2-3 years ago. Netflix wasn't available on the East Coast because one of their data centers went out or part of their load balancing for US East 1 went out for a while. But that being said, overall, every improvement that they make for one person gets consolidated and spread out to the rest of them, and their products are always getting better. Like one of the big things that we've seen in the last 2 years, I think that Morgan and I have been personally working with AWS, is their server types keep getting better and better. So you're like, oh, the newest CPU. You don't have aging hardware stuff anymore because everybody wants the newest stuff and it makes part of their life cycle. So, and so many people are plugged into the ecosystem, there's always going to be a way to do it. If somebody is like, hey, what tools did you use to do X? Somebody's probably done it, and it's probably on Stack Overflow or AWS support. Do you want to talk a little more about battle tested stuff as well?
No, I think you got it.
So now the fun part. Cloud is not magic. I know it sounds like magic. CTOs love to hear that it's magic, especially if you have less of a technical CTO. It really isn't. It's not just a bunch of servers, but it's also not easy. And there's a reason that there's like DevOps has kind of become this sexy term for like, oh, people like you can do away with, you know, the 5-person ops department you had. Not really. There's still networking involved, there's still storage, there's still provisioning, there's still, especially as you get from a single server site that's just like, a blog that somebody is running to a multi-machine, multi-layer stack, you start doing scalability. So it's not magic. Some of the things that we encountered, I'll let you speak to this because you started on this stuff.
Oh yeah, sure. So when I first started the migration by myself, and what I went off the spreadsheet that I created of all the different servers that needed to be migrated, and I started doing them one by one, and it was taking a while. But really, the biggest issue was that there were engineering things that I just didn't know about. So I kept reaching out to Sina to talk about how do I think about this in the cloud and that sort of thing. And then having a whole bunch of people work on the thing at one time helped us move our velocity ahead so that we didn't have to pay the next month of hosting in the private cloud. So.
Yeah, planning. So we've kind of alluded to the fact that we use a lot of different tech stacks. And we'll go into a bit more technical detail on those a little bit later. But the planning part, you have a plan, it's never going to go 100%, but if you don't get everybody in the room involved with everybody who actually pushes code somewhere or knows how something's working and literally whiteboard out every single piece in detail how you're going to move it and what the interdependencies are, you're just going to end up breaking stuff and potentially have really bad things like data loss. Downtimes which you don't know how to fix because you're starting to span two environments. Just nasty little things like that. So doesn't matter what your organizational tool is of choice. It could be Trello, it could be Jira, it could be, or any of the Atlassian products. It could be, Google Docs. It could be, just a big whiteboard that never gets erased. Whatever it is, as long as it's captured somewhere and everybody who has a stake in this and everybody who needs to be informed by this can point to it and say, yeah, that's right, this is working, these interdependencies work that way. That really brings sanity to everybody, so nobody thinks you don't want to have any dark corners anywhere basically when you go into a migration, because when you shut off your old system, pretty much assume all that stuff is gone and lost. So make sure you get backups of everything, and your new thing needs to provide all the services that your old one did, if not more.
Yeah, so this is sort of the same thing about how our migration started really, really small and really slow. And especially when it came time to move Drupal over, because in the private cloud we were running the stack was Akamai and then Varnish and then we had three webheads and then the two database servers. So moving all of that without downtime, or at least thinking about how we were going to schedule our downtime in, really required somebody who had done it before. And Sina and we used to work together before at Martha Stewart, and they did migration. And so I know Sina was the one to go to help us get moving forward. So.
Migration seems to be reliable when you go from one level to another in Drupal on its core files, but any custom files get lost. Did you use a CSV file and export it out that way and come back in on your?
No, we'll go into that migration process. It was actually, we got lucky in that there's ways when you do the migration to actually pretty much preserve your data sources, including the database, and there's a miniature amount of downtime, but not too much. So yeah, you can have near zero downtime, to your point. That one, to point two, takes a lot of planning, especially when it's your core site, it's publicly accessible. And so you have your DB servers. If you're big enough, you have usually a static file store like an NFS server sitting somewhere. We don't have S3 plugin integration, which you can do with Drupal, but we don't have. So we had that, and then we have 600 gigs of data that we had to serve out. So syncing that up, you can't just be like, all right, bring the site offline, wait 3 days for you to sync over as large as your public a pipe is to another environment and hope for the best.
Sorry, having coffee. We'll be right back.
Exactly. So you can have that, but it takes a lot of diligent planning and a recommendation, which is kind of like a subnote here. Make sure when you are doing any sort of cutover, you have at least 2 people. Somebody, because usually what happens is one person who's doing the particular switchover for one part of the infrastructure knows that really well and has all the steps, but you need to have the perspective of somebody else of, did you think about this detail? Because that person's usually so far cut out in the weeds that you're going to just get distracted and be like, wait, we needed to update this config file, so you're still pointing to the old database, and then you get data disparities and really bad stuff starts happening. Yeah, we can both speak to this one. I'll let you start on this one.
Yeah, so the way that we had things set up in the private cloud, again, was not necessarily ideal because it was, for the most part, just me working on it. So although you shouldn't completely re-engineer everything when you move over, or else you'll just be doing it forever, you should think about stability and redundancy, especially because there's a certain amount of risk when you're switching over. So what we did for a couple of things was, like our MongoDB databases, instead of just having a single node, we made sure that they were clustered. And then also for our Rabbit server, in the private cloud, that wasn't clustered either. So so we created a Rabbit cluster for the new environment. Also because it was, we're saving so much money, so it didn't matter to spend up a couple of extra servers here and there. So yeah.
We had another developer who he's our man in the Ukraine, Sergey. So him, Morgan, and then I came on board, and we officially had a DevOps instructor, a DevOps department. And with a pinch of luck, your migration makes you feel like this when you're done. Yeah. And we really did, because we'll go into some of the issues that we had, but at the end of it, we really did feel like close to zero downtime. Everybody is happy. Literally the morning that we migrated the main site over, we have a Sonos sound system in the office. I was playing some song that I had on repeat in Spotify, and I just danced into the office, and our COO was like, "Work!" I'm like, "Whoa, just my little mini dance, and then we'll be fine." So I think here would be a good segue to actually go into some of the details, especially Drupal specific. Our Drupal tech stack, like Morgan mentioned, is fairly straightforward if you have a scaled out Drupal site. I'm actually going to go forward into tools we use, because a lot of these come into play. So pretty much all these were in are what we're using for the open source in AWS, but specifically for the Drupal part of the migration. So we had MariaDB servers, that was our basically MySQL relational store in the private cloud. We're Redis as well, for our cache value instead of Memcache. Varnish for our caching layer. We use Nginx PHP FPM instead of Apache for file serving. Then what else did I miss? NFS. Store. I think that's the big things, right?
Yeah, sounds about right.
And we have integrations with other stuff, like for our transactional mail system, we actually have a messaging system, so we use RabbitMQ for that, and that was there as well. But
Solr,
yeah.
Forgot Solr.
Solr.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes, Solr. That should be a slide in here. Sorry, we use Solr for our search indexing. So the biggest tiers for us to get this as possible. One is an external thing that we haven't mentioned here, which is to pull off mostly seamless migrations. DNS servers really come into play. So anytime you're going to migrate between environments, show of hands of most people know here basically how DNS works. Okay. So we went a little bit insane, and depending on your DNS provider, it'll cost you a bit to do this. But for 24 hours beforehand, we lowered the TTL of our DNS records to 5 seconds. Seems like an insane amount of lookup, but DNS, you can't always trust other providers to propagate and have the records. So you want as little as possible. So if you, for some reason, need to flip the big lever back to the old environment because something goes catastrophically wrong, at most you're probably out for 30 seconds to a minute, as long as you don't have a really, really crappy DNS provider. What?
That's smart move.
Yeah. So we lowered our edge TTLs to that. The web servers, our web heads are pretty generic, so we established a code freeze So for about 3-4 days, I think nobody was allowed to push anything outside of unless there was a big security vulnerability patch that we had to push or anything, just so we could test out. So we had the webhead sitting ready. Something that we did, and more. I want to talk about the VPN tunnel establishment because that was. I'll let you talk about that.
So one of the snags that I ran into when I was working by myself was setting up the VPN tunnel so that we could get files and that sort of thing from the old environment into AWS. And so that's kind of tricky to set up. So, and I feel like the AWS documentation isn't great for that. You just have to keep reading it until it makes sense. I don't, it's about all I can say.
That documentation now.
Yeah.
Over and over and over.
Right.
Oh.
And part of it too was putting in a ticket with the old provider and getting them to make the setup on our Cisco firewall and going back and forth and making sure that all that stuff worked. And then there's a bunch of I discovered or something, a bunch of really great networking tools to make it work or to do the testing to make sure they work. There's Netcat and ngrep, but there was another one too. I don't know, whatever. But there's a bunch of great tools out there to send traffic back and forth and open ports and make sure that things are talking back and forth. And that's another thing too. When you move to AWS, you may have some networking issues. All of our networking stuff was pretty much set up for us in the private cloud. But with AWS, we had to set up a VPC and make sure that the appropriate security groups were on the appropriate boxes and things were opened up correctly, and the route tables were set up correctly. So that took a significant amount of time too. So just to put that out there.
So webhead's easy part, no problem. We'll go into a little bit. We moved from using F5 load balancers in Rackspace to HA proxy as our edge load balancer. So the key parts that really the webheads are the webheads. The Redis servers are the Redis servers. Unless you have unless you're really overusing your Redis store as something major, if you're running e-commerce, a lot of times carts are stored in there. There are ways of syncing that. Usually, in practice, it's just better to kind of either send some dummy traffic, so a lot of your commonly cached objects are already in there, or just start from scratch and take the hit, and you're going to have a little bit of a performance penalty for a little while as the Redis cache is warming up and getting populated. So the NFS server and the MySQL server are some of the trickiest parts. Once you have a VPN set up, you can start doing some interesting things. So what we ended up doing was, for the NFS server, you just have to take the time to do an initial sync on whatever store you're using. We're using GlusterFS, which is kind of like a multi-region replicated NFS server. Gluster is a Red Hat product, but it runs on Ubuntu or any flavor of Linux that you want. But basically, because of the way that the data centers in AWS are set up in availability zones, you can have two of them and it actually mirrors it. So if one goes down, you can update your comp files and your files are perpetuated and you're not completely offline. So we set up a Gluster server, Gluster cluster, I guess, in AWS, and then we had the NFS server here. And you have to do the initial rsync. There's pretty much no way around that. But there's a daemon wrapper called lsyncd, which is a Google Summer of Code product. And what it does is you can say, from this server to this other server, I want you to rsync and keep up to date in the background. And you let it run and it's daemonized. So any changes on a time interval that you specify in a directory, it'll propagate those files over to the other side, which after your initial sync, depending on how quickly you generate traffic and the bandwidth that your VPN allows, is actually pretty safe. So usually when you do your cutover, when you bring your site offline for a couple of, I think for us it was 5 minutes or something like that, you let the final rsync happen and you don't have to touch it. So you're pretty much sure that whatever's here, you tail the lsyncd logs and you're like, oh, everything's great and everything's there. So that's how you solve kind of the data store stuff.
That's how you got the 600 gigabytes.
Yep. Yeah,
How long did it take?
It took 6 days to do it. Actually, we actually ended up using a little bit of a hack because the VPN tunnel we were using for other stuff, which I'll get to for the database in a second, and the bandwidth that is limited because VPN overhead is really high at a networking layer. So I actually ended up installing the S3 or AWS CLI tools in the NFS server in Rackspace pushing it up to S3, which is high bandwidth. It was just using the big pipe that we had outbound, and then syncing it down, and then setting up LSyncD for the diffs. And the S3 up took about 5 to 6 days. And then down, when you do it down, it's already in the AWS network, so it went a lot faster. So that took like a day. And then I just set up the LSyncD between the two locations, and then that was minimal traffic over the VPN, so we weren't really getting a hit at that point. The database is a little bit more interesting. It's something that you have to go into a little cautiously, but tends to work. And 3 migrations worth, it's worked so far. So we had a master and a slave MariaDB server in rack space, and in AWS, there's actually instructions in their RDS documentation, if you look at it, for how to migrate data in. And what you can do is you create, whether you're running your own MySQL, MariaDB, Percona, or you're using Amazon RDS for their MySQL, you can make that server be a slave of your current Drupal server. So essentially, you do a MySQL dump, which is a snapshot of your existing database in the old environment. You import it into the new. It can take, sometimes hours, depending on the size of your database. And then based on the record from when the dump was taken in the old environment, you set that as the new slave record to start over here, and you make it a slave over the VPN tunnel. So again, depending on your database traffic amount, that can be a lot of traffic that you're sending over it, because depending on the size of your queries, the size of your database, your traffic throughput. But for us, after the initial sync, which took, I think, like 20 minutes to resync up to the latest state, because a slave replication is asynchronous, it was pretty much no more than 5 seconds behind in lag for the records that was updating. So when we confirmed that was in place, one of the things I'd also recommend is you, especially for the database, you let that sit in place for a couple of days and make sure the slave replication doesn't die. Because network interrupts can happen, you can hit traffic things, you can get record conflicts depending on the complexity of what you set up in your database. So yeah, with crossed fingers for 3 days, everything looked fine, so then we were ready to pull the trigger on that. And we did. So we brought the site offline just to make sure we had no more database master rights, made sure the slave was caught up, made sure all the files were caught up, pointed DNS to the new site. And we have a friendly 503 page. It's like a little sloth hitting a keyboard that says, I can't find it, so people wouldn't be too irritated at us. And then we just updated DNS and started looking for traffic in the new environment, and stuff started to go. And after about 15 minutes, I think everything was fully caught up. So, as part of that, you do have to promote your slave DB to its own master, which you can do, and you just remove the slave record, and then it's its own thing. With it, as long as you're sure it's in a consistent step and there's no more writes, you can cut it off and say, basically, you say it's like reset slave server, or no, it's reset slave something, which I always forget the last clause in MySQL, but it's in the AWS documentation. And then it becomes a master server, and you start writing records to it. And at that point, you run your tests. So you can register as a user. You can, in our case, fulfill a campaign, buy a product, whatever it is that you're using Drupal for. So, yeah. Do you want to talk about the load balancer a bit? HA proxy, because you had to set that up.
Yeah, right. So in the past, we were just using Varnish. Pound as our SSL termination, and then 2 Varnish heads as our load balancers to the 3 web heads. But instead of using all of that stuff, Sina suggested using HA proxy. So I set that up, and there was some discussion about using HA proxy or Nginx as a load balancer, but HA proxy was easy to set up, so that's why I ended up using it. And it's still, it's high performance, and it works. So that was fairly, you can just look in the documentation. It's fairly easy to set up the directives to make that work. So we have one HA proxy server, which sits behind Fastly now, which does all our load balance. Two? Well, I mean, there's 2, but...
They're redundant in the Fastly.
Okay. Anyway, so we have to, there you go. That's another point too. You mentioned planning earlier, and keeping your documentation of your environment up to date is like really difficult, but it's really worth it, because when you have a lot of engineers working on stuff, things can kind of get out of sync. So it's really nice to know where everything is at. So, yeah.
Should probably hear it. We also were capturing our configs briefly. Ansible was like our savior. If you're like me and you're not a coder by nature and you will be horrible at it if you ever do it as a full-time career, Ansible is YAML and it's Python, which even I can read, which anybody should be able to. So automation frameworks, so our web servers, we're like, oh, we need a new web server. We ran an Ansible playbook against it, and poof, it's done. And it's a lot simpler than Chef or Puppet, which Morgan and I have both looked at. And Morgan, being a developer, I remember complaining about Puppet, about not wanting to deal with anything.
Yeah, Chef, yeah.
Or Chef, yeah. Some other awesome tools we used. New Relic. These are closed source. We love open source, but sometimes you just need to get the job done. New Relic is amazing for stack monitoring, and we put it in Ansible as an installable agent on all of our servers. We opted to, run Amazon's relational database service, mostly because it bought us a lot of things. Again, we're only a 3-person infrastructure team, and worrying about backups, snapshotting, data stores, expandability, disk failures, any of that stuff, it's a lot of overhead. And not to say that it can't be done, but doing it right and well is, so it's totally seamless. Amazon's figured it out. It's still an open source product they're using. Debatable on how much you want to consider MySQL open source at this point, but that's a different debate. Ansible Tower, which is a pay-for product that Ansible, which is like a GUI wrapper around everything. We use that just because it was easier. Pricing model has changed a little bit from when we started, so it's significantly more expensive now. But even still, even if we had to pay for it today, it would still be worth it. I'll let you talk about Slack, because we started when that was there.
Oh yeah, so we were using HipChat, and now we use Slack. I'm not really sure why they switched necessarily. A lot of people really loved Slack over HipChat. But I did want to say about Ansible Tower real quick. If you have the time and the inclination, you can set up Jenkins to do a lot of the things that Ansible Tower does, especially if you don't need all the robust capabilities and you don't want to spend the money. So,
yeah.
Yep.
And there is a Ansible plugin for Jenkins if you look in the plugin directory, and it's really good. And GitHub. I know the whole world relies on GitHub. It is still a closed source version. We didn't opt to run our own Git or GitLab repo to make things just interesting because we wanted to.
Yeah, so just briefly about choosing your tools wisely. Obviously, there are always a million different ways to do things. And if you have a lot of developers that are engaged and excited about technology, they're going to want to use all the things. That's partially why we have so many things that we use. You should always be considering developer happiness in terms of what tools are developers excited about, and also what tools are developers comfortable using. Sometimes there are tools that might be better or something, but they are really annoying to set up. The documentation is terrible, those sorts of things, and that doesn't make for happy developers. There are also long-term considerations. Sometimes you can start with a certain tool. We started with HipChat, and it just didn't have all the features of Slack. So one of our developers had to take several days to migrate all our chats over to Slack. So if you start with a tool, consider that you're going to want to be using it for years rather than just a few months, because it's really annoying and disruptive to change over tools. And that speaks to the migrating tool sets. Totally sucks. So, yep.
All right. Oh, so now the exciting part. So we're in AWS. We're live. We moved all of our products. Basically, we now have access to an entire network with as much capacity as at least we as an org can ever throw at it, in 9 different global regions. I think there's a 10th. Well, I know there's a 10th one opening actually in Atlanta that they're building out right now. Yep. For the East Coast, and then which you told me about, and then there's one I think they're building out in Hong Kong to have another one in close to the Asia markets. So we want to run a data center or any of the services in any of these things. I should qualify that. Not all services of AWS are available in all areas. 95% of them are. And so now we're paying significantly less than we used to, and we have access to all this good stuff. And there's pretty much no downside for us. I will say this about AWS, like anything else, you got to be a little bit wary of vendor lock-in. If you put everything that you use on an AWS service to substitute everything you used to have on a server, and then you want, for some reason, need to or want to get out of it, it's going to be a lot of re-engineering time. So there's still some stuff we're running on EC2 instances, which Amazon has a service for, but we've opted not to so that we have the flexibility. It's not always about control. It's usually not about cost either, but it's something to be wary of. Amazon is doing some amazing things with wrapping their tools together, but once you're stuck on it, if they ever change anything, you have to re-engineer your way around it, and it's not up to you anymore.
So, as I said before, we were using Akamai for as our CDN. So Akamai is pretty expensive, and the interface isn't necessarily so great. But it is like a really, really robust product, and it has a long history of serving people very well. So, but then we discovered a new CDN, Fastly. So they're like the new kids on the block. And so essentially what Fastly is it's Varnish under the hood, but it's got a UI wrapped around it, and it's tweaked and tuned to work as a CDN. So you can, as soon as you put your configuration changes in, you load them and they propagate within seconds. I'm not sure, how long does Akamai take? I haven't.
Akamai is 50 minutes.
Yes. And also, so that's a long time. So because Varnish has GeoIP features, they've been integrated into Fastly. So you can simply just put in like headers and into your Fastly configuration, and it'll pass through country code and all that sort of thing that MaxMind and GeoIP offers. So as I said, because it's on Varnish, it supports VCL syntax. So if you had Varnish servers that you were running locally, you can just essentially upload your VCLs to Fastly and run all of those things all the way at the edge instead of running them on your own Varnish servers. The cache clear. So if you wanted to cache clear your entire site, I think it takes like 500 milliseconds, whereas one page on Akamai takes 7 minutes, and multiple pages take 40 minutes.
And your entire site dump usually takes 4 hours.
Well, there you go. And like when you have, go ahead.
They actually have a brand new feature where it takes down to 30 seconds
Oh.
per page.
Nice.
It's like
Thank-
but
okay,
I
but-
still Fastly's waiting.
Yeah. Also, something about the configuration. The configuration is versioned automatically for you. So you can always go back and do diffs between whatever versions you have. It's another really nice feature.
Fastly has a lot of great documentation, and they're constantly like writing blog posts and things about how you can do new things with Fastly in their setup. And one final thing, because Fastly is fairly new, and I don't know if it's because they're fairly new, but they have great support. So you put in a ticket and you get a response like almost immediately. And the other thing is they're often having developer dinners and summits and that sort of thing, so that you can go and like actually talk to the people who work with Fastly, and they will give you their card and they respond to emails and all of that. They're really incredible. Haven't necessarily had that much contact with Akamai support, have you?
Yeah, it's not that great.
So there you go.
Actually, you have to pay a lot also for like, if you want an architectural feature, we went to one of their dinners that our CTO talked at, and we met with their CTO and we're asking him about features like, yeah, it's on the roadmap, just drop us a line. With Akamai, when we were at Martha Stewart, we had to pay a fairly obscene amount of money to have a dedicated technical resource come out and assess our site, which was fairly nightmarish.
And one thing, just real quick about Fastly too, that we didn't mention, the cost is incredibly. It's incredibly affordable. There was at one of the Fastly dinners, I was talking to somebody, and they said they were spending like $3 million or something a month on CDN charges, I think through Akamai, because they were doing like ad bartering or whatever it is. But then they switched to Fastly and it went down to $400,000 a month. Like, that's huge. We also saved a lot of money. I don't have the exact numbers, but just as a thing.
So what is your experience about service on AWS? What do you like you talked about Fastly, you had a good relationship with them. It was quick. Did you have anything with AWS?
For support?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, they've actually been pretty good also. There was one time when they were lagging a little bit with the tickets, but I think we pay like $300 a month or something to get support with them, which is a lot less expensive than our private cloud provider. And if you say that a ticket is like high priority, they'll get back to you pretty quickly. I think within 8 hours or something like that.
2.
It's 2. Okay, sorry. So yeah, they've been pretty responsive and quick with things.
And also on AWS, you can actually say what's the best way to contact you, web or phone. And if you put phone, they'll call you right away, even if they put you in a wait queue. And a second thing, always reach out to Amazon to figure out whether it's at a meetup or just emailing the support line. Ask for the rep in your area because they have tech reps who very well support all the organizations in an area. And if something's not getting prioritized properly or whatnot, I've never had to go beyond one email to the local rep to be like, hey, can you have somebody take a look at this if it's like an emergency situation? 15 minutes later, somebody's on the phone with you. So yeah, things that got schooled in. Your migration will make you feel like a superhero team when you go to sleep, and the next morning you'll be like, how come the site is really, really slow? Or something like that. So what happened was we had the instance size that we had for when we first started, we only had one HA proxy server, then we added a second one later on. Somebody had found our origin IP address and was hosing it with very basic, not sure how many network folks are in the room, but basically very basic DDoS, SYN flooding, all that stuff, because we hadn't really TCP optimized the box. So I have a little bit of background in that, so it was a very crazy 2 hours of network tuning the box, increasing the instance size, logging things, throttling people by IP, session tracking, all the good stuff you have to do, but it was just something based on our timeline we didn't have time to incorporate into our migration. So that stung a little bit. And when your load balancer is literally your gateway to the rest of the world right behind your CDN, everything slows down. So we got it fixed. It was a kind of adrenaline-fueled desk with Morgan, myself, and our CTO sitting how to figure stuff out. And now we're fine. But anticipate something's going to go very, very wrong. And just make sure whether you're monitoring or checking it every 5 minutes obsessively, you take a look at your environment and don't go to bed and be like, You can speak to this.
Yeah, so DevOps really is not just like about being a developer that also does ops. It's really about bringing the ops team and the developers together. The Rabbit servers and all of our like messaging stuff is really complex. So I worked with our messaging guy to like set up those servers. And there would have been absolutely no way for me to figure out how to get all those things set up. And there would have been no way for him to figure out how to get those things set up without me. So working together on these things is really important. Yeah, we've talked about this a few times. We would have been paying 50% more, and now we're paying 50% less, and that's always a good thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, the documentation stuff, it's hard to do when you're doing it. Write yourself some notes.
Yeah.
Even if it's just something that you can email, Slack, or whatever to somebody like, I don't know what's going on with this. Jot down what you're doing, because getting it out of your head when somebody else needs to help you on it is impossible and will just drive everybody nuts. Yeah, so after you're done and you're in the hosting land of milk and honey, you realize all the backlog stuff that you wanted to do, which was the slide before, or one of the original slides of, ideas about how to fix all the things and doing none of them. Now you can do all of them and you have to prioritize. So a lot of more stuff, documentation, automation, deployments, all that stuff that has to go into our mix that we're still working on. So we have at least, I think, something like 18 months worth of tickets if we did nothing else just to get our environment to a way that we'd be happy with. So developers could deploy without ever bugging us. We could roll back efficiently. We have full high availability automation if a region goes out, backups, all the good stuff that you need to have in a good environment.
And then just another gotcha about AWS. Occasionally the server, because it's a cloud environment, they'll tell you that the server that your VM is running on is like degrading and it's going to go down. But that doesn't happen in other environments. So you have to be wary of that, and you can take a snapshot and like spin it back up again. But it's just one of those things that you have to monitor and be apprised of.
Did you take the time to actually figure out what you wanted at the end line of this? Once you got it migrated over, it was up and running between what you had, like your goal-oriented steps?
Yeah, we have a pretty clear idea. A lot of it is we know what we want in principle, what tools we're going to use to do it, like monitoring, right? New Relic does some monitoring. We have StatHat for other stuff, for messaging queue. Morgan and I have both used Isinga/Nagios before. So we have to assess what are the best tools for our environment. So a lot of it is doing an assessment of the tools to meet the goals that we want to do, and then making sure we don't have tech bloat, because 16 engineers leads to a lot of that at a certain point. A happy benefit of all this, we now have a dedicated infrastructure team. The 3 DevOps people, we actually are our own department, and benefits are,
Yeah, like I was saying, instead of it just being me, we have more than one set of eyes, so we're more secure and things are set up more correctly, and that's important. Different areas of expertise. Sergey in the Ukraine, he's really very good at a lot of things and he loves to read the kind of documentation that almost puts everybody else to sleep. I mean, and so he knows the ins and outs of why things work. So it's incredible. And you've heard all the things that Scene has done that everybody else has been like, well, you should probably call somebody. Right. And now we're more fully integrated with the tech team too. So, and that's good and that's bad. We're in more meetings, which is not great, but people know what we're doing, which is awesome. And they also can help us set things up, and we can help them make more sane choices about what tools they're using and the way that they're going to go, which is great. And this is our tech team now. We're a bunch of Octocats in a box.
I know we run a little over time. I do want to take questions. We can hang out if people need to leave. We're here happy to answer questions.
I've got a question about scope and everything. So, obviously you guys, compared to the things that we do, a much more sophisticated, complicated type of environment than what most of my clients are accustomed to running in. Okay, so for the most part, we use, VPS servers, Apache or Nginx, whatever. And so, all the networking stuff is basically done, right? So we configure our little Linux environment, and that's about it. So for a shop like us, where we don't have a dedicated ops team, we know how to configure a VPS or whatever. Does it make sense? Would it be so much additional overhead and so much to learn to recreate a similar type of environment in AWS that it really just doesn't make sense?
So for us, it's funny that you said that, because Morgan and I, we actually help out some of the people we used to work with at Martha Stewart, who now have their own Drupal consulting firm, on this very thing. Hire contractors and DevOps people that you know to set stuff up, but also AWS isn't the only game in town. DigitalOcean, Linode, what's the other one? There's one other one that I'm forgetting. It's like $5 or $10 a month for the base server. You can still use a lot of the tools we're using without going to that scope and basically hand off billing to somebody. And for instance, Morgan and I use Ansible playbooks to spin up Solar, Varnish, for this particular case, Apache, and MySQL, all on the same server on Linode. So automation tools, definitely your friend. There's some network firewall stuff built in with IP tables that we set up. All fairly basic stuff, and a lot of the principles make sense, but it needs to make sense for your case scenario. But the public cloud and having a VPS, as opposed to trying to rent a data center and have somebody bring up one thing for you. Right. There's so many people doing things I know Rackspace in their public cloud, they've reinvented that paradigm 4 or 5 times in the last 4 years for offerings as their OpenStacks have gotten better so they can run their own public cloud, but the admin interface has changed, migrating between them is not possible, different cost structures, different network structures. So with Linode or DigitalOcean or something, you're my server, my IP, I'm done. And then everything I do on that is done. And you can then cascade off of that. Does that answer your question?
It kind of does. And it basically just tells me that, basically building something from scratch on AWS is significantly more complex than, you know, say DigitalOcean, where I go, hey, I need a box, I need an image on it, you know, I need a Drupal install. And we've actually, instead of using something like Ansible where we're designing all this config, we've taken you know, droplets and said, okay, we're going to configure this exactly how we want, take a snapshot, and now we spin up new snapshots from it. You know, so that becomes you know, very scalable for us, for small businesses. But if we wanted to, you know, say, okay, we're going to create this LAMP stack on AWS and manage stuff, that sounds like there's so much you have to learn about AWS just to get to that point.
Yeah, there is a minimum viability of scale that you want to get. I forgot who it was. I think somebody from Pinterest was giving this talk, where when they started, they had, you know, basically a bunch of servers in a closet. They didn't know what their growth was going to be like, and they ended up moving to AWS because of all the scale. But it was basically the same thing. It was developers, no ops person, and they were just configuring their servers ad hoc. So the scale and effort that you have to put into it kind of has to be worth what you're doing, and there is a minimum barrier for AWS, which is why DigitalOcean has said, we're not really a competitor to AWS. We have some major customers, but we're trying to play in their sandbox. We're not going to offer 95 products. It's going to be a bunch of servers and a couple of nice things on top of that. But because a lot of people want to run smaller, even medium businesses, don't necessarily need all the stuff that we're doing.
Right.
Questions?
Yeah.
So right now we have some of our properties on Fastly and some of them on Akamai. Akamai kind of has us in this unruly marriage right now. If we could write the whole site in ESI, we would. So like we just got a lot of ESI, but we also have migration coming up. Does Fastly have something like ESI?
So
and if we use it, would we be kind of married?
So the ESI spec is interesting. Akamai was one of the original founders of that spec, and they have a different implementation than the standard because they had a lot more customizability. Varnish and Fastly both support ESI, but it's a subset, so you'd have to do a careful assessment. I know Fastly's added some stuff to the ESI because they're basically based off of Varnish 3 and then some stuff, and you can do ESI includes, but you'd have to look at the feature set more carefully. I think it'd be worth it to rewrite it because worst case scenario, you could just drop the same, about Fastly, you literally get the VCL output when you look at your thing. So if you want to copy it and run it on your own Varnish server to test, as long as you don't use some of their features, like if you don't have the Maxmind database, you can't really do geo-IP lookups, that part will fail. But if you do ESI includes in Fastly, if you just want to give it to a client or for yourself and just say, nope, our Varnish servers now, we want to walk away from Fastly because we don't want to deal with them, you're in a lot better position. And Fastly is pretty open about that. They're very customer driven. They're in the, hopefully it stays that way. Companies, when they become the king of the hill, tend to change a little bit, but at the moment, they really want the product to continually to improve.
All right, thank you guys for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Great presentation.
Thank you.